Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome again to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville news, government, politics, education, business, arts and entertainment, parking, whatever gets our attention. I'm Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass, which you can find at CompassKnox.com. We cover all of the above, including parking, joined as always by Scott Barker, also co-publisher and co-founder of Compass. How are you doing on this rainy Friday morning, Scott?
Well, I've managed to stay relatively dry today. The weekend's here. Holidays are on the way. So despite the weather, everything's good.
Yeah,
how about you?
It is December. You are right. We're in the thick of the holiday season. I am a little bit sad this week because just yesterday, one of my very favorite singer-songwriters of all time, Shane MacGowan of the Pogues, died. Not totally unexpectedly, I have to say. His lifestyle being what it was, his death has been sort of like foreshadowed for, 30 or 40 years. But it had a little bit of seasonal resonance because people who are maybe not huge Pogues fans probably still know the song Fairy Tale of New York, which you tend to hear a lot this time of year. One of, I think, the greatest Christmas songs written in the last 40 or 50 years. So if you have not yet had the opportunity to put that song on for the season, I'd recommend putting it on and tipping your hat and raising a glass to Mr. MacGowan. All right. We have several things to talk about this week. An interesting lawsuit filed by a former Knoxville mayor about voting in Tennessee. We'll talk about that. A couple of interesting studies about the uninsured population here in Tennessee, talking about people without health insurance and how big that population is and what options there could be for the state to address it. Animal control. We talked about this a couple weeks ago when a change to animal control services came through County Commission. This week it was at City Council. A little bit of a different discussion there. We'll talk about that. Governor Bill Lee kicked off the upcoming legislative session this week with a big push for universal school vouchers. Definitely going to talk about that. And to start us all off, Knox County's growth plan. And Scott, there was a meeting this past week of the Growth Policy Coordinating Committee, which you covered. And this was part of this ongoing process we've been talking about coming out of the Advanced Knox Planning Update. And basically this has to do with Knox County setting long-term goals for growth and development. And as there was at a prior meeting they had about this in October, lots of concerns raised about specifically the future of farmland in Knox County. So what's going on with that?
Yeah, this is the growth plan is kind of the big picture thing. Like, there are three zones that gets the counties divided in: the urban growth area, which is what it says. It's where cities can grow. Then there's the planned growth area, which you can, put air quotes around suburban development, and that's kind of where, and you want to think about areas like Powell or Halls or Carnes, where there's a lot of residential growth and some commercial nodes and things like that. And then there's the rural area, which as the name implies, is mostly farmland and some subdivisions that are have larger lots and things like that. So the
kind of the biggest difference is basically density, right? You go from the densest parts of the urban area out into the somewhat less dense but still quite developed suburban areas, and then the least density and development out in the rural areas.
Yeah, and it's the this is mandated by state law, and this committee is meeting, and they're proposing changes to the growth plan. The fight, as you mentioned, is mostly about rural versus planned growth areas. The plan that has been developed would take 17.5 square miles of land that's currently classified as in the rural growth area and move it to planned growth, which means more dense subdivisions, some more commercial development, and that sort of thing. About 2/3 of that is in northeast Knox County. The areas from Mount Washington Pike, Ritta, Coreyton, Gibbs area out in there, which also happens to be where some of the best farmland in the county is located, and a lot of the farmers came out and spoke at this meeting, as well as the meeting previously, about this. They don't want all that land classified as planned growth, where it would have denser developments and all.
Because one thing that the planned growth designation kind of implies is that it's not going to be preserved as rural land. It's not going to be preserved as agricultural land. It is going to be developed at some point.
Right. And this is going to be a big deal over the next couple of decades. The projections are that Knox County is going to grow by 77,000 people, and that's about the size of Johnson City. So we're going to have Johnson City move to Knox County, essentially. Not all in one place, of course, but it's a lot of people, and they're going to have some place to live. The farmers who spoke want to preserve their way of life. A lot of them had been farming in Knox County for 200 years or longer. Their families had. So there's some real tension there. And but one thing that kind of came out, and I think the County Mayor Glenn Jacobs, who was named the chair of this committee during the meeting, was one thing that came out, and they made a major point of emphasis on this, is that basically it's his plan. And
because he's the one who convened the committee. This is a county effort, and under state law, it has to be a mayor. And in our case, that would either be the county mayor or the mayors of Knoxville or Farragut who could convene the committee and propose amendments. And Knoxville and Farragut are not going to do that because they're already all developed, essentially.
Yeah, but I think that one of the things they wanted to make sure is manage people's expectations about what this committee can and cannot do. One of the things Deputy Law Director Mike Moyers read from the state law, they had a fairly long presentation, more or less, of the law and what it said. And this committee can't amend the plan. Only Jacobs can amend the plan. And now they can make recommendations, but they can't amend it. And they also can't approve it or disapprove it or reject it, in the sense that if they don't like it, they can kill it. What their role is to either recommend passage or recommend rejection, and then it goes to the two cities, Farragut and Knoxville, and Knox County Commission. They're the ones who have the final vote. But the committee's role is fairly limited. It is basically advisory in nature, and they won't really hammered home that. I think that was to get the expectations set.
Now, the committee, if the committee voted to not recommend it, that could carry some weight with commission or city council or
absolutely
the town of Farragut. And it only takes one of those three bodies to vote against the change,
right.
the proposed changes to kill it, which is what happened in 2019, in early 2020, when Jacobs pushed for a more narrow amendment to the plan, which did get approved by county commission and city council, but Farragut Board of Mayor and Aldermen shut it down, and that was the end of it. So, any one of those three bodies is still going to have sort of functional veto over this.
They are. But this particular committee is essentially advisory only, and their weight. Their opinion of it will might carry greater weight or lesser weight moving forward, but they themselves cannot stop it or change it.
Yeah.
So, but they really wanted to emphasize that during the discussion, and there was some. The county also wanted to make another point. In that they're not. This doesn't mean that they're taking farms, or that people can't farm or whatever. And they one of the steps they took to do that is to invite Bill Clabo, who's the executive director of the Foothills Land Conservancy, to come and talk about conservation easements, which can limit development on family farms. If you get a conservation easement put on that, it's basically a deed restriction that controls development on that particular piece of property. So that's an option that farmers would have to preserve farmland on an individual basis. They can't
control what the farmer next to them does,
but they can't control what
protect their own farm.
And that's kind of the that's kind of the rub is a lot of these especially multi-generational farmers are, they're going to farm. What they don't want necessarily is the farm next to them. Someone owns it, and for whatever reason, their families, their heirs, whatever, decide to sell it to a developer, and all of a sudden there's a 300-unit subdivision next to their.
And that would be the difference, because you can already, agricultural, rural land, you can develop as it is, but your density is much more restricted.
Right.
And so if that land moves from that designation to the planned growth designation, then there will be county ordinances and zoning updates essentially to go along with that, which would mean that those areas would be allowed and envisioned to have denser, greater development than they would if they remained rural and agricultural.
Right. And get kind of, getting back to what this committee can and can't do, one of the members of the committee, Brodus Hubbs, who's the head of or on the board of the Knox County Soil Conservation District, which has a seat on this committee by law. Their board has approved requesting that all of this land be reverted back to rural areas, and they Hubbs formally asked Jacobs to do that, and Jacobs invited any other members to make any other suggest any other changes that they might want to see to this plan to him. But again, it says, it's going to be up or down. Jacobs will be making that decision, and a lot of the most of the people who spoke did speak to that issue about that. There were some others. We were talking about density. One of the Home Builders Association. Benjamin Mullins was their attorney who represented them at the meeting. One of the things that they would like to see is a change in density in the rural areas. One of the things the proposal does is, right now, if infrastructure is in place, developers can develop in rural areas at a density of up to 3 dwelling units per acre. 3 houses on a 1 acre lot, 1 acre piece of property. The proposal reduces that to 2. And Mullins argued on behalf of the home builders, put it back to 3, please, because at 2 units per acre, given the price of land and the cost of development, they can't make money at 2 units per acre. So they really need at least, need 3 in the rural areas. So that's, that came up. One of the other issues that has come up is mentioned. This is a big picture thing, the particular zoning designations and all that. The county is going to be looking at revamping its zoning code in the future, much the same way the city did a couple of years ago. And those are the details of how development actually occurs within these broad, big picture areas. And there was some discussion about that. Larry Silverstein, who is a neighborhood advocate, talked about how that's really the devil's in those details, and they want to see more those things worked out along with this plan. So which probably won't happen because this is already moving forward. The committee is going to meet one more time later this month in their second meeting. They have to have 2 official meetings, and this week or last week's meeting was the first. The second one will be in later in December, and they will. I believe it's the
December 19th.
19th. There they could vote on whether to recommend or recommend passage or not to the city council, board of mayor and aldermen, and county commission. They could do that vote. They have the flexibility to not vote on it at this upcoming meeting and meet at a later time and vote on it again. But it could the vote on it could come as soon as the 19th, and then it would go to those 3 governing bodies for an up or down vote. And like you said, any one of them can kill it.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. Well, so we will certainly be talking more about this because they do have that meeting in a couple of weeks, and then it's going to go through all 3 of those bodies in the first, the early months of next year. And then I think the county's plan, assuming it all gets passed, is that then they will come back with their comprehensive sort of land use and transportation plan that would put more of those details on top of this kind of broad vision. Yeah. So certainly we'll be talking more about this, but all of this is very much connected to lots of things that we have been talking about here for a long time: housing and growth and how we handle all of this, infrastructure. It's basically a lot of people would say that growth is good from an economic development standpoint, and that it's better for a city and county to be gaining people than losing them in lots of ways. But obviously it creates a lot of challenges and a lot of frictions. So we'll have more to say about all of that. Another thing that we're going to be talking about a lot for the next several months, no doubt, is school vouchers. And we've already mentioned this in some previous week's podcasts because it had been telegraphed for a little while now that Governor Bill Lee's top, or certainly one of his top priorities for the coming legislative session, is going to be to essentially expand what is right now a very limited, allegedly pilot school voucher program statewide and make it available to basically every person of school age in the state of Tennessee. And Lee made that formal announcement this past week. On Tuesday, he convened a great big old public event. I was going to say press conference, but it wasn't really a press conference because I think he did answer some questions afterward, but there were no questions at the event itself. He had on hand significantly the leaders of both chambers of the legislature, Lieutenant Governor Randy McNally and House Speaker Cameron Sexton, side by side with him, saying, yes, we support this, let's do it. He also had special guest Governor Sarah Sanders from Arkansas, who was there because Arkansas just passed something similar to this year. And so Sanders was there to just kind of be a cheerleader and say, this is great, join the school choice revolution with us. And, this is pretty interesting for me personally, because I've been covering public education on and off since 1992. And I feel like school vouchers have always been lurking in the background of the public education conversation for the last several decades. There have been organizations out there pushing for them for a long time now, usually without very much success. I was doing some historical reading on the topic this week and found an essay from 2007 basically saying school vouchers are dead. People have been pushing for school vouchers. Nobody wants them. They've never gotten traction anywhere. I think that the headline was actually the rise and fall of school vouchers. Well, in politics, all sorts of things don't stay dead, and school vouchers are one of them. And, one advantage that school vouchers have had in this is that although there's never been like a huge grassroots public wave of demand for vouchers, there has been a small but extremely well-funded group of conservative think tanks and an even smaller and very wealthy group of conservative rich people, billionaires, donors who have really been driving this for years. And it's funny, I got in a little conversation about this with some of our readers on our Compass Colloquy Facebook page, the group that's open only to subscribers. You can join it if you're a subscriber, and let us know what you think, and maybe get in arguments with us, because somebody on there said, well, you're making it sound like there's some kind of conspiracy, and I said, well, it's not. It's not a conspiracy, because conspiracy implies something being done in secret, and maybe something being done illegally. Nothing's being done in secret here, and as far as I know, nothing's being done illegally. But if by conspiracy you mean a small group of powerful people getting together and trying to sort of like fundamentally push through changes in basic functions of society, then this has been kind of a conspiracy. Like, we know who the conspirators are. It's the DeVos family in Michigan, who founded and funds something called the American Federation for Children, which has chapters in just about every state in the country, very much including Tennessee. And they've poured millions of dollars into that. The Walton Family Foundation, the Walmart heirs, they, I think, just put $6 million into a pro-voucher push. And the Koch brothers, Americans for Prosperity. And it's this kind of like coalition of, I guess, libertarian conservative billionaires who, in general, sort of philosophically don't like big government. And they certainly consider public schools to be an organ of big government. It's in most places, in most states, in most localities, it's one of the biggest things government does from a spending standpoint,
Right.
And so I guess it's natural that for people who are suspicious of big government, that's a thing they want to look at. And they are suddenly having great success in Republican states. There are now 9 states, all of them with Republican-dominated legislatures, that have passed some version of essentially universal school vouchers just in the last couple of years. It's all so new that we really don't. Some of them aren't even operating yet. They've just passed the legislation, like in Arkansas, or maybe Arkansas is operating, but if so, it's only been running for a few months. And so we don't have any data yet on like what the outcomes of any of those programs are going to be. But to me, it goes back to something that we've seen in on a lot of issues in recent years, which is really the nationalization of state politics. And of course, this is, of course, you always have national issues that get filtered through the state legislatures. But you've really seen, and this has happened in both Republican-dominated and Democratic-dominated states, where sort of big picture national issues, abortion, education, like these are being fought out at the state level as they always have, but they're dividing, maybe more than they have in the past into kind of predictable camps. Like if you're a Republican legislature, you're probably going to do this. If you're a Democratic legislature, you're probably going to do this. And there's kind of a sense of an issue like vouchers has typically struggled at the state level because there are a lot of local interests who are very skeptical of them. Local school systems, local school boards, school superintendents have traditionally been very opposed to vouchers because they have the potential to literally pull students and money out of the public school system and divert not just those students, but actual state funding to private schools. And to be clear, what we're talking about here, so what Lee is proposing is a voucher that I think the level that they're setting it at right now is $7,075 per student. That could, in the first year of it, so that would be this coming fall, the 24-25 school year, there would be a cap of 20,000 of these vouchers, or what they're calling education freedom scholarships. I think part of what they're trying to do, the word voucher, because of its long history of failure, has a lot of sort of negative connotations. And so they're not calling them vouchers, but I mean, it's what they are. It's what we all understand as school vouchers. It's a check that the state sends you that you can spend on your kid's education. And so in the first year, out of those 20,000, 10,000 would be reserved for low to sort of middle income families, people up to 300% of the federal poverty level. For a family of four, that would be, if you make up to $90,000, you would be eligible for this for any of your, if you're a family of four, say you're a single parent making under $90,000 and you have three kids, you would be eligible to receive $21,000 from the state under this, that you could then spend any way not literally any way you wanted to, but you could spend it on tuition to any participating private school. And that's really up to the private schools, whether they want to participate, because it's pretty much open to a whole range of private schools, from secular to religious to, whatever. Or you can also use that money for homeschooling. And there's, you can use it to pay for materials, you can use it to pay for transportation, anything like that. And then the other 10,000 in that first year would just be basically open to first come, first serve. And that would include people who are already on the program in the three counties that do have a very limited voucher program right now, which is Shelby, Davidson, and Hamilton. And then in year two, and so that would be 20,000 at 7,075 per student, which would be about $141 million. So even in that, limited first year, like, it's a pretty good amount of money come out of the state budget. The second year, then the idea is it would just go statewide. It'd be like basically anybody with a school-age child, even if it's a kid who's never been in public schools. If you have a kid who's in private school right now and has always been in private school, or if you are homeschooling and have always homeschooled, everybody with a school-age child would be eligible for this. And he's not, at the moment anyway, proposing exactly how much money the state might spend on that. There's a sort of thing that says it would be open to anybody, but if we don't allocate enough money to meet all of the demand, then there would be priority based on, some level of income qualification, people who are already in the program. Like, there would be sort of some set of preferences. But it is kind of theoretically just wide open. And so there's about 1 million, rough numbers of 1 million students, K-12 age students in Tennessee. About 90% of them are currently in public school. About 10% are in private school, private and or homeschooled. The homeschool numbers are much smaller. And so if you think about this at that level and say, well, what if everybody did it? At $7,000 per student, that would be about, be over $7 billion. And that is pretty close to what the state spends on public education right now. Like, that is close to the entire state budget public education. If the state didn't set some limit on it. Now, there's all sorts of things, of course, that are going to limit this in practical terms. There's a lot of counties that don't have any private schools or don't really have.
Or many. They might have one.
Or many, right. They might have one very small Christian school. There's a lot of speculation about what could happen. Would there be, would people see the opportunity to open new schools or expand existing schools? Certainly that could happen. I think one thing to keep in mind is that $7,000 per student, might sound like a lot to an individual family, or it may not. But it's not very much to run a school. Schools are expensive to run. $7,000 per student is actually less than is spent on public school students, because that's just the state allocation. And then there's local funding that goes into local public schools as well. So it's not actually, at least under this current proposal right now, it's not equivalent to what would be spent on your kid at a public school. So I don't know that we need to talk about this in detail right now, because there's going to be a lot said about this over the next few months. But I think everybody knows sort of who the, obviously Governor Lee and the Republican leadership in the legislature is going to put a big push on this. How Republican legislators from rural districts that do have a lot of concerns about this feel about it. I think that's clearly going to be the big challenge for Lee. He's not going to get any votes from Democrats. Democrats are against this. They're already out there saying, we support public schools, we support teachers. This is basically privatization of a public good. And also, you're going to send a bunch of checks to rich people who send their kids to private schools.
Because that's one key point that might get overlooked, because in the past, vouchers had been promoted as a way to allow lower income students from lower income families in failing public schools to go to have a choice to attend a private school, and but this is when it's open to everyone, essentially. No matter what your income level, you would be able to use that as a supplement to send your kid to an already existing private school. If it's their tuition's $10,000 a year and this voucher is $7,000 a year, you get a $7,000 discount on your tuition. Essentially, I mean, when you just boil everything away, that's what it would be. And this is to go to a private school. And it's not, and a lot of times people, I think, conflate private school or school vouchers with charter schools, but they're two different things. Very different things. Charter schools you can kind of look at as a quasi outsourcing thing. Where they basically. You've got an organization contracting with
charter schools are functionally public schools. They're just public schools that aren't part of the local public school system.
Right. But with vouchers, basically those are scholarship programs set up specifically for private schools.
Yep.
I mean, you don't use a voucher to go to Farragut High School.
Yep. Or to a charter school.
You use a voucher to go to a private school. So.
One thing I want to add on this too, because this has been a topic that I've dived way deep into with thousands
Seth
of
Barber,
times,
ladies and gentlemen.
That I think a lot of people don't realize when they're having the conversation is that it doesn't matter why you pull your kid out of a public school, whether you move to Kentucky or whether you decide to homeschool your kid or whether you send them to a private school, the state pulls that out of the funding that they send to Knox County.
Right.
And so one of the arguments...
State funding for public schools is on a
per pupil...
It has always been to some degree on a per pupil basis, and under the new state formula, the student-centered state formula that Lee pushed through last year or 2 years ago, right, that's even more the case now.
And it's not clear whether it's the exact same number that they're going to put on the voucher per se, but at the end of the day, that's one of the things I always get lost in the argument against vouchers on, is that, they're taking money out of the schools. It's like, you take your kid out of the school for any reason, they're taking money out of the schools from the state's perspective. And so I think it's a detail worth having noted in the conversation, because I think a lot of people overlook that because they think, there's 60,000 students in Knox County schools. If that drops to 50, we're taking $10,000 worth of it. But it doesn't matter about the vouchers or not.
Right.
That's happening anyway.
That money goes out of the schools. I think the concern, obviously, for supporters of, I guess, what we can call traditional public education, is that having vouchers available would just encourage more people to pull out, and so the argument that you always hear about this from people on the public education side is that if you take 30 kids out of an elementary school, first of all, depending on how they're distributed across the grades, that could theoretically be one classroom's worth of kids, but they're probably not all going to come from the same classroom. And so you could lose those 30 kids and lose the funding for those 30 kids, but basically all of your costs to operate that school stay the same. The school costs the same amount to keep open and heated and cleaned, and probably you're still going to need the same number of teachers, because if you lose 1 or 2 kids per classroom across a whole elementary school, your staffing needs are not going to go down. So that's one of the concerns on that side. There's also a whole concern about accountability. We hear a lot about accountability in the public school system, and there's been a tremendous focus on that, including from our Republican state legislature, about holding schools accountable, holding individual teachers accountable, holding school systems accountable. There's a new grading system that's supposed to be coming out soon, which we'll be talking about within the next few weeks, whenever that lands. But there's this whole huge system to force accountability on public schools, all based on the idea that you're spending public money and you're performing a function that is important to society, which is education. But so far, what's been talked about with this, nobody's said a word about accountability. It's just, we're going to give a check to people to go and spend at some private school. Those private schools are by and large not subject to any of those state regulations, reporting requirements, testing requirements, licensure requirements, just like the whole complex matrix of accountability that we've built up for public education, which is all predicated on the notion that, well, this is public money, so we need accountability for it. Now suddenly it's going to be like, well, it's still public money, but because it's going over here into this other category, we're just going to say, well, parents know best. So I think there's going to be a lot of questions about all of this stuff. I have when the initial school voucher pilot program got passed, which clearly was not really a pilot program because we're only in the second year of it now. Yeah. We don't have any real data from it, and they're just going ahead and saying, we're just going to do it statewide. And of course, when they passed the pilot program, that's what a lot of skeptics said was, well, this is really just sort of like the nose in the camel nose in the tent kind of thing. And what this is really about is universal vouchers. And at the time, a lot of people who pushed for it said, no, it's not. Well, obviously it was. And that is clearly what the push is here. But whether politics in the state have shifted enough in the last 4 years in 2019, they barely got it passed. In a very limited form, and only by promising basically every Republican legislator that it wasn't going to affect their school districts. And so now, there's certainly been turnover in the legislature, and the public conversation around public education has shifted in various ways. So maybe that has changed sufficiently that they feel like, obviously, Bill Lee is making a very big play here. This is a very ambitious proposal that he's putting forth. And we're going to be talking about it a lot. Oh, yeah.
Well, and Bill Lee can put forth an ambitious proposal like that because he's term limited and he's just won re-election, so there are no consequences for him.
Well, and one thing to mention about that is he is term limited. He was just reelected. You know what he did not run on when he ran for reelection? He did not run on universal school vouchers. Yeah. He said he was in favor of school choice. Yeah. Clearly he was. He was pushing for, talked about maybe expanding the education savings account program, but he cannot claim a statewide mandate for universal vouchers because it just wasn't part of his 2022 campaign.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about animal control. We did talk about this a few weeks ago. Young Williams Animal Center, the proposal here is for them to take over animal control responsibilities both inside the city of Knoxville and outside the city. County Commission approved that change last month, basically relieving the sheriff's office of doing animal control outside the city and moving that to Young Williams. So now City Council talked about it this week. Conversation there, a little more complicated for various reasons.
Yeah, well, things in the city often are a little more complicated. The basics of this are not. The Knoxville Police Department, like the sheriff's office in the county, currently does animal control functions, the enforcement function. When there's a stray dog, they're the ones who go, that kind of thing. They are going to turn that over to Young Williams, as the county has done. Young Williams will get a combined from the city and the county about $3 million over the next 4.25 years to do this. Those positions basically go to Young Williams. You'll have 17 people on staff to do all this. Enables the city to actually, they're going to be eliminating 4 positions. 4 other positions are going to be moved elsewhere in the city, and they're going to be the ones who respond to things. If things are, if there's a situation where there's horrible neglect or horrible abuse that would be a violation of state law, they would be able to call in the sworn police officers of the Knoxville Police Department to come and look into it. That's exactly what they do now, because the animal control officers in the city under the police department aren't sworn law enforcement officers. They're civilian employees. So, I mean, they already kind of do that. So it's really not going to change a whole lot about how those calls are responded to. And but there are some other changes that are big, and that's because the city, unlike the county, has an animal control board, and their responsibilities have traditionally been to advise the mayor and the council on animal control statutes. There are a lot more animal control statutes in the city than there are in the county. You can't have livestock, for the most part, can't have livestock in the city. The board has always been the permitting authority, where if you, one of the examples was a Christmas pageant. If your church has a Christmas pageant and you want to bring in live animals as part of the manger scene of the Christmas pageant, you have to get a permit. It's a display of animals. When the circus comes to town, they have to get a permit. They have to go to the animal control board and get a permit. The thing is, animal control board only meets 4 times a year officially, so they always have to call these emergency meetings and get everything together and do these things to get them done in a timely manner. And it's kind of bulky, and as one of the city staff attorneys called it, Byzantine way of doing things. But the permitting process will now move to Young Williams, where if these things come up, or you get your backyard chickens or whatever it is you want to do in the city that would require a permit, you will go to Young Williams instead of the Animal Control Board. They will issue permits. You can appeal any rejection of that to the Animal Control Board, but the board itself doesn't issue those anymore, and the board will continue to advise the mayor on that. One of the issues there, that brought up a lot of discussion. That the city council passed the transferring the contract or creating or joining the contract with the county and Young Williams, passed that fairly easily. I mean, there was some discussion about it, some clarification on what Young Williams would be doing on enforcement and things like that. That passed easily. This discussion is to change the board, and there was a membership change. The police department would lose. They have a representative on the board. They would no longer have a representative on the board. But other organizations do, like Zoo Knoxville has a representative on the board. The board would that's a relatively minor thing, except right now Young Williams has a seat on the board, and Janet Testerman, who's also a city council member, is the CEO of Young Williams. She sits on the board. She's also the chair of that board, and the question was raised about whether a a board hearing an appeal of a Young Williams decision shouldn't have a representative of Young Williams as a member who makes a decision about whether Young Williams made the right call or not on a particular permit. So there was some discussion about that, and they wound up deferring that part of it. It should be noted real quickly that Testerman is a member of City Council. She recused herself, did not vote on any of the measures dealing with the transfer of responsibilities to Young Williams, and only answered questions from in the discussion part, only answered questions from other council members in her role as Young Williams' CEO about how they do things. She puts that hat on instead of her council hat. And she's leaving office. She didn't run for re-election, so
she's leaving office in 2 weeks.
Yeah, basically. 2 weeks. Yeah. The 16th is when the new city council members take their oaths of office. So anyway, that all, the city council is still going to consider these changes to the board, but they wanted a couple of weeks to look at it more closely and ask some questions and see if the proposal that's before them now, that's an ordinance, it has to pass on 2 readings, so they're going to take a look at it again later this month to see if some of those conflicts can be worked out. But the actual boots on the ground animal control functions are now officially going to go to Young Williams. They're going to start in April 1st. And one of the things that the city had to do was they're going to be working out of the city's animal control unit's current location. So the city's leasing that to Young Williams for $1 a year. That's over on 5th Avenue at a city facility there. And also the equipment. They're leasing all the vehicles and equipment that the city currently uses for animal control to Young Williams. So there's 7 vehicles, equipment, or the cages and traps and all the things that you use in animal control. Those all are going to be leased to Young Williams for a year, but they will be responsible for enforcing the animal control ordinances in the city and in the county beginning April 1st.
Right. And just to be clear, when we talk about enforcing ordinances, like they will be empowered to write citations, essentially,
yes,
for various violations. But anything that is a criminal violation, which there are criminal statutes governing, animal abuse and things like that, they would still have to call in KPD or the sheriff's office, depending on the jurisdiction.
Right. Absolutely. They're for instance, in the city, which is what this was talking about, violations of the technical violations of the city's ordinances, like you have too many chickens, you get cited for that. That goes to municipal court. They hear it there and make a decision on whether to fine you or not there. This is only the kind of civil matter of whether you violate local ordinances, as Chief Paul Noel of the police department said at that meeting, emphasized over and over again, if it's a violation of state law, then they got to call KPD or KCSO.
Right.
And
right. They're not actually privatizing police functions. Exactly.
No,
well, they are up to a certain level, but only a sort of a low level.
Right. As you said, if it's something that is abuse or gross neglect that would be rise to the level of violating state law, then it and that's the way they already do it. I mean, the in the city, the as I mentioned, the animal control unit officers in the city aren't sworn law enforcement officers with full police powers. So they so whenever they're confronted with a situation like that, they call patrol officers to come and help out. And so that's a done deal. That goes into effect April 1st, and that will, as Noel and Sheriff Spangler have said, enable them to focus more on their primary duties, which is, catching bad guys,
catching bad guys,
enforcing criminal law,
not bad dogs,
right? And now I will be remiss, I think, if you don't just mention this about last week's city council meeting. We talked in last week's episode that there was a resolution that Councilwoman Amelia Parker brought forward calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Very, very, basically accusing the state of Israel of war crimes, standing, and expressing solidarity with Palestinian people. Also, condemning anti-Semitism at the same time, but it's a very, very much a call for city council to weigh in on this international issue, which is exceedingly rare that they do anything like this. As might be expected, there were well over 100 people, maybe more. I didn't even try to bother to count them. People who came to the meeting. There was a huge contingent from the Knoxville's Jewish community there, a huge contingent from the Knoxville's Palestinian community there. They were they had flags, the Palestinian flags, Israeli flags. They were yelling at each other. There was a lot of chanting. There was people when people spoke to the matter, they were yelling over it. It's a very, very contentious crowd that was there. In fact, council limited the number of people who could speak. They adhere to their own rules. The rules state that 3 people can speak on one side of an issue, 3 on another. There were 80 people who signed up who wanted to speak, and they said, no, we're having 3 on each side, and that's it. But this went on. It was close to an hour of, people were crowding up to the podium where speakers were, standing throughout. As I said, they were yelling over each other. It was a pretty tense atmosphere. And what was interesting is we went through this hour of people yelling and chanting and really, thinking that, things could turn really, really ugly. And then it was time for council to take up this resolution, and Councilwoman Parker, made a motion to approve it. And for the first time during that meeting, utter silence. You could hear a pin drop, and not one other council member seconded the motion, so it died. Mm-hmm. And died for a lack of a second. I think that while no one spoke, obviously, because you don't speak when it's not on the floor anymore, it was pretty obvious they just did not want to get to weigh in on this and didn't think it was either didn't think it was appropriate or just didn't think it was or thought it was too divisive of an issue, especially since it's not a local issue to weigh in on. So.
Yeah, and I think that we've seen this before. I mean, just a couple months ago, we had the resolution brought to county commission about quote-unquote sexualizing children, which did have a second but got voted down. I don't remember whether it was 10-1 or 9-1. And, very different issue, and not an international issue, but a national issue, something that was clearly mirroring and playing off of sort of like national culture war talking points and stuff. And I think in both cases, you're seeing a disinclination from a lot of our local legislators to get involved in making basically symbolic statements about issues and topics that they don't actually have any jurisdiction or authority over, and that they see as, just as you say, fueling divisiveness within the community and among their constituents to no particular, from their point of view, to no particular purpose, because it's just outside their authority.
Yeah, the times that city council has weighed in on national things have been when they or state issues, but when they are going to have a direct effect on things that go on here, a direct effect, not an indirect effect. Obviously, they were one of the things that some of the people in the Palestinian community brought up is there are people here whose family members have died in the conflict. So but as far as the public policy part of it, and an example it actually came up on Tuesday as well, where again a resolution from Parker asking the United States Congress to not, or the congressional delegation that represents Knox County, which is essentially Tim Burchett, because this has only been raised in the House so far, to oppose a bill that would limit city governments or local governments from charging franchise fees to cable companies for broadband infrastructure and some right, they wouldn't be able to charge it for the rights of way and things like that, which funds community, or the what used to be called community television is now Knoxville Community Media. It funds that organization, so that does have that would have a direct effect on Knoxville. And City Council, even with that, they were reluctant to. There were several members who were reluctant to weigh in on that, and several of them said that they'd already contacted Burchett's office and let him know what they thought. They didn't really need to pass a resolution to do it. So while they do occasionally, they did pass that. While they do occasionally weigh in on national issues, it almost invariably has something to do with a law that would require them or our local governments to change what they do, and this, obviously there was no real connection between this resolution and anything that is done locally.
Yeah, and of course, the thing is, all of these folks are themselves individually elected officials, and so a city council member, a county commission member, anybody can make their own statements on social media. They can call press conferences. They can, advocate or lobby themselves in any number of ways. But I think what we're seeing is just an ongoing reluctance at the sort of formal, we're going to make this an act of this body and a statement of our city or a statement of our county on this. It's just something that a lot of local officials would prefer not to, because it is, I am sometimes skeptical of slippery slope arguments, but that's one where you can see, well, where do you stop?
Yeah.
Are you going to pass resolutions on everything going on in the world? You could generate, a whole lot of screaming and yelling, but you're not going to get a lot of local governing done under those circumstances.
Right.
All right. We also had a report this week about a couple of interesting studies that just happened to come out in, relative proximity to each other, having to do with Tennessee's uninsured population. So the first of these is a study that the University of Tennessee does every year, and it's actually a study that they're contracted to do by the state about the TennCare program, which is our Medicaid program in Tennessee. And this annual survey was started in 1993 when the state first created TennCare, when the state first got its federal waiver to create its own Medicaid program, essentially using federal Medicaid funds. And the biggest thrust of the survey is to get feedback from people who are in or on TennCare about the program and their satisfaction with it and problems with it and so on and so forth. But in the course of it, they also, because they survey 5,000 households, so it's a scientific statewide survey where they're selecting to try to get a picture of kind of healthcare across the state. And so they also, among the things they ask people is if they have health insurance, and they track that year by year. What is the proportion of the state population that does not have access to health insurance or doesn't have health insurance? And what the study showed this year was that number is about 7.7% of the state population, which comes out to about 541,000 people, a little over 500,000 Tennesseans. And it's about 9% of the adult population, because TennCare is heavily weighted toward children. And so the percent of uninsured children is lower than that. I think it was in the 6%, 5 to 6% range. But the adult population younger than 65, because of course once you get over 65, then you have access to Medicare.
Right.
But the population between 18 and 65, essentially about 9%. So almost 1 in 10 people, working age people, don't have health insurance in the state. And that tallies, interestingly, with another study that just came out, done by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, national foundation involved in various kinds of social issues, which took a look at the 10 states that have so far not expanded Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act, aka Obamacare. And Tennessee is one of those 10 states. Basically, that was because of the Supreme Court ruling that came down on the challenge to Obamacare that was filed in the courts. One of the things that came out of that was that states are not required to accept the federal money and do that expansion. And a group of Republican-dominated states have never done that. That group has been shrinking sort of slowly year by year. I think a few years ago we used to talk about there's 14 states that haven't done it. And then we were talking about there's 12 states that haven't done it. Now there's 10 states out of 40 states. So 40 states plus the District of Columbia have all done this, but 10 haven't. Tennessee's one of them. And, the argument had always kind of been that, well, there is a state share that you have to pay to this. And so there was concern about, well, that could grow and it could lead to greater expense for the state. But the state share is small. The feds pay most of it. Basically, Tennessee at this point is giving up close to $1.5 billion a year, every single year in federal funding that would go to provide health insurance to people who live in Tennessee and don't have health insurance. And they just haven't done it. Now, former Governor Bill Haslam did try to pass a version of this, and it never really got anywhere. Bill Lee came into office saying he had no interest in revisiting it, and he very much has not revisited it.
He has kept that promise.
Yeah, there just doesn't seem. I mean, I'm sure in the coming legislative session, some Democrats will file some bills to do this, because they do every year, and those bills will get completely smothered in committee, and you're never going to
do every year.
Yeah, you're never going to hear another word about them. But what this study showed was that if these states did it, so Tennessee would get about $1.5 billion in federal funding, and that would provide insurance for, well, it's complicated because it would probably add about 300,000 people to the TennCare rolls, but some of those would be people who do have access to other insurance already, or maybe already have insurance, and who would switch over to it because it would be better coverage. But about 150,000 people who do not currently have insurance, which is close to 30% of that uninsured total right now, would have access to insurance. And so the state could cut that, more than 500,000 people who don't have it by 150,000 people, just by passing this at basically pretty minimal cost to the state, just be accepting that federal money, and they're not going to do it.
yeah. One of the arguments that you hear against this is that, and it's been one of the arguments that that opponents have made to Obamacare since it was conceptualized, is that, it's an added cost to the federal government, adds to the deficit, adds to the debt. The deficit hawks are hate it. And I know I've talked to people here who say, well, if we're rejecting federal dollars, but the federal government's spending too much money as it is, so they need to not spend it. That's not the way government works. Right. That $1.5 billion that the state of Tennessee is not accepting, that doesn't mean the federal government is cutting $1.5 billion out of their spending. They're spending it elsewhere.
Yep.
It's already appropriated. It's already accounted for in the whether it's money raised through taxes or money raised through borrowing. that money's there, and it's going to be spent somewhere. It is not going to be spent in Tennessee because it's not been expanded, and that's the thing. So it doesn't, this doesn't save the federal government any money by rejecting it. So
yeah, and the people who it affects are, it's basically what we call the quote unquote working poor population. Yeah, because it's people who are over the current income cap for TennCare, so they're not eligible for TennCare as it currently stands because it hasn't been expanded. But they are mostly people who are working. These are working adults in Tennessee, but they're not making very much money. They don't have insurance available through their jobs, and are a lot of those folks are struggling in various ways. They're struggling with housing costs. They're struggling with other things. And so it has, and that was the point of the Robert Wood Johnson study, is like this has a very real direct impact on the lives of people who are already some of the most kind of stressed and struggling people in the state. Yeah, and
this also does create kind of a perverse inequity that a lot of people don't talk about, but the people who would be eligible for this, who can't get this insurance now, are the working poor. Once you get to that income limit, those who make above that income limit, who get their insurance through the insurance marketplace, like self-employed people, for example, they get subsidies.
Yep.
They get discounts. So, if you make below a certain level, you get nothing. You make above a certain level, again, it's a window, but there's a window there where you can make pretty decent money above the median income in Knox County, and you can make pretty decent money. You can, and if you're self-employed or your employer doesn't provide insurance, you can go to the marketplace and get a subsidy.
Yep.
And that's weird.
Yep. Yep. Well, and it's clearly it's not the way the law was intended to work.
No.
Because the law was not supposed to have that gap, because the law was expecting that every state was going to expand this and take the federal funding for it.
Yeah, the law just kind of assumed that what state wouldn't take because the Fed, originally it's what I think it's 90%, I believe, of the cost of this goes to the federal government. So it's a very minimal cost to the states for the expansion, and it was just not conceivable that states would reject it. And in fact, if it weren't for the Supreme Court decision, they wouldn't have been able to. But even then, it was kind of of course they're still going to accept it because they don't really have to pay that much for it, but Tennessee and 9 other states still have not.
Yep. And we don't expect that to change anytime soon. Okay, let's talk about this interesting lawsuit filed by former Knoxville Mayor Victor Ashe, former Knoxville Mayor and current News Sentinel columnist, and the League of Women Voters of Tennessee, and Knoxville resident Phil Lawson, who is a developer and philanthropist here in town. And this is an interesting lawsuit because it's challenging a state law, and that state law is actually sort of in two parts. Part of it has been on the books for 50 years, going back to 1972. And this has to do with voting in primaries. And what the law that has been on the books that whole time says is that to be eligible to vote in a party primary, Republican Party primary or Democratic Party primary, you do have to be a, quote, bona fide, unquote, member of that party. But the only real requirement that the law puts forth is that you attest on voting day all of us who have voted in primaries have done this. You go there and they say, what ballot do you want? You say Republican or you say Democrat. That is your sort of testimony.
Declaration.
Right. That's your declaration that I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat. And that's really all it currently consists of. Because there is no definition in state law of what a bona fide party member is, and we do not have party registration in the state. When you go to register to vote in Tennessee, you do not register as a member of a political party or as an independent. There's a lot of states where you do. I used to live in New York State, and they have party registration. So when you register to vote, you either register as Democrat or Republican, or I think in New York State there's several other, Working Families Party or like whatever, or you could register as independent. And you in those states, to vote in their primaries, you have to be literally a registered Democrat, a registered Republican, but we don't have that in Tennessee. So that law has been on the books, and it periodically gets talked about, and you'll hear sort of grumpiness sometimes after specific elections about quote unquote crossover voting, where people in, say, the Republican Party might feel like the more conservative candidate lost in the primary because a bunch of liberals crossed over and voted in the Republican primary and voted for the less conservative candidate. I mean, that can happen. There's local elections that I think we can all speculate that that's probably what has happened in some of them. So it's not like it's a completely that's not a fictional scenario. It's something that's essentially allowed as long as we have mostly open primaries here. But this past year, the legislature added a little section to that law that is requiring election commissions at every polling place to post a sign, basically just reciting what the law says, which is you have to be a bona fide member of a party and you are subject to criminal prosecution if you cast a false ballot, essentially claim to be a Republican, but you're not really, or claim to be a Democrat, but you're not really. And so on the one hand, this is just actually stating what's already on the books. But what this lawsuit alleges is that it's going to intimidate and confuse people. Because if you show up and you've been voting for years and years and you've never seen this sign before, and suddenly you show up to vote in a primary, and maybe you're a person who's voted in the past in both Democratic and Republican primaries, I can tell you, because as a matter of public record, you can go pull my voting file. That includes me. Yeah. I have voted in both Democratic and Republican primaries.
Guilty as charged.
I do not personally identify, in fact, on a ongoing, I don't give money to any political party.
I'm going to jump in again, guys. This is another one of my favorite topics that I do on my show all the time. Because both parties pretty clearly in their bylaws, the top portion of what makes you bona fide or not is who have you voted for in the past and who you give your money to.
Yeah.
And so if you donate to a Republican or a Democrat or go back and forth because it's a friend or whatever, you've now broken bona fides by both parties' standards. And so you're not out of that. I'm sorry. This is just one of my favorites. I love this topic.
It's true. Well, and that is one of the issues raised in this lawsuit. Victor Ashe, lifelong Republican. He was a Republican when he served in the state legislature. He mostly donates to Republican candidates, but he has, in fact, donated to both Republican and Democratic candidates. He also, in his New Sentinel column, often takes Republican office holders and candidates to task. And so it says in the lawsuit that, for example, somebody could challenge his status as a Republican. Phil Lawson, on the other hand, does identify as a Democrat, but he said he's given money to both Democrats and Republicans. And so when he comes to vote in a Democratic Party primary under those rules you're talking about, Seth, he could be challenged. You're not a real Democrat. But the state law doesn't actually, like what you are saying, Seth, those are the guidelines in the party zone.
Right.
Those are not in state law.
And then I've asked Chris Davis about this in the past because it's so curious to me how this works, and I've asked a couple party chairs in the past as well, is the challenge process. If I were to say, Jesse, you're not a real Republican, you shouldn't be pulling a Republican primary, I, as a other voter in line, have to do it. Or at least another member of the public has to do it. It's not something that the election commission does automatically. It has to be challenged by the public. And then the election commission has to come in with a 2-to-1, a 3-member body that's 2 Republicans, because Knox County is a Republican majority county, and then 1 Democrat. And then they have to unanimously agree that you are not what you said you were for you to be then subject to breaking said law.
Right.
Which it's insanely complicated, but with the lawsuit sake of it, especially the way this lawsuit's written, is it's about the intimidation factor of it, because I think it's true. A lot of people don't know these little nuances.
A lot of people don't know that law's on the books. All they know is they show up to vote and they ask you, do you want a Democratic ballot or a Republican? You pick one and you go from there.
And to agree
That's most people's experience.
To agree with you earlier, I voted I don't know how many times, and I didn't realize this thing existed until a couple of years ago when I started learning about it. So I've certainly broken this law in the past. allegedly, maybe I should put on, if we're putting this on the record.
Well, you haven't clearly broken the law because, again, right now, the only declaration necessary is that when you show up on Election Day, you say, yes, I want a Republican ballot or I want a Democratic ballot. That's really all the law lays out. And that's the claim in this suit, is that you can't, because the suit is not just challenging the new part about posting law, it's challenging the actual law itself and saying that you can't have a state law that threatens criminal prosecution for something if there's no clear way for people to know if they're complying or not.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing. I mean, we've been talking about these instances where people voted, Republican primary one year and a Democratic primary another year. That happens frequently here because in many times in our county-wide races, there are no Democratic choices. There historically have not been Democratic choices that they don't even have a candidate on the ballot. It's happened in the sheriff's race, for example, where the sheriff was decided. Basically, whoever occupies the office of the sheriff has been decided in the primary because there were no Democratic candidates. But this can affect everybody. If you don't know anything, you walk into a polling place and it says you have to be a bona fide member of a party to vote in the primary, and you're sitting there going, well,
I don't even know what bona fide means.
Well, first of all, even if I do know what bona fide means, I don't know. I'm not a bona fide. Nobody's ever made me a bona fide member.
My voting ID card doesn't say.
I voted Republican my entire life, and I'm not registered as a Republican because you can't in Tennessee, and no one's ever bona fide, given me the thing. So I guess it's a criminal violation. Right. So
am I allowed
to vote? And I wouldn't be surprised if there are a handful, very small number of people who might say, well, I need to find out if I'm bona fide or not before I can vote and leave.
Right, 100%. Because I've had I'm pretty sure it was my dad. I love you, Dad. I was talking about elections, talking about stuff. He's like, I'm a registered Republican. I was like, no, you're not. I'm like, you're not, Dad. You can't be a registered Republican in the state of Tennessee. He's like, no, I know I am. It's like, okay, if you're not, but if you say so, and it's just, and it's not just my dad. I've had that conversation with a number of people over time where they will swear up and down that they're registered Party A in the state of Tennessee, and it's like you can't be. It's just not a thing here.
Not under state law.
Right.
You can be a party member. You can make contributions to the Knox County Republican Party.
You can get their newsletter, all those things.
And you can be qualified to go and vote in their local party officer elections and so forth. But that is not laid out in state law. None of this is in state law. And so, I mean, we'll see where this lawsuit goes. I think it's an interesting question to raise. Of course, there's a whole philosophical discussion about, is it better to have open primaries or closed primaries? And especially when, the largest growing group of voters in America are independent voters. It's people who don't identify with either party. And if you go to closed primaries and party registration, unless they choose to register with a party for the purposes of being able to vote in a primary, all of those folks are just going to be shut out of voting in primaries. And especially in local elections, a lot of times, like you're saying, the primary is functionally
the de facto general election.
To editorialize a little bit, personally, I would like it to go that direction because I would like it to be more clear how shut out independent voters are from the reality of the way this system works. Because I think it would, hopefully, that'd be my hope, I guess, is that it may get more independent-minded people running as independents, or getting more parties on the table or something like that. I know I've argued third-party stuff with you before, Jesse, and you always kick me out, and I get where you're coming from.
I'm not. Don't get me wrong. I'm not opposed to 3 parties, 4 parties, 5 parties, 6 parties. I just see a lot of structural challenges.
Right. The more I think about it, the more I've gotten into. I kind of like the nonpartisan city way. I don't necessarily like their process, and there's some issues with the process. I would like to see maybe a ranked choice system with a nonpartisan election. I think that would be the most useful to me as a voter.
And that's the point. That's what I'm chasing. Some states have moved toward that in primaries. or have, like in California, they've moved to what they call the top two primary system. And so you can have candidates who run as Democrats or Republicans or whatever, but they're all in the same primary.
Right.
And then the top two vote getters, whether it's a Democrat and Republican, two Democrats, two Republicans, whatever, they go on to the general. There is actually a pretty interesting patchwork of approaches to this across the country. And one thing that's interesting about it is it doesn't, unlike a lot of things in our current political situation, it doesn't neatly break down along party lines. There's a lot of red states that have open primaries, but then there's red states that don't. There are blue states with closed primaries. New York State, like I said, has party registration. California has this top two primary system. And so it is something that we have a lot of variation in. And you know, people can have any kind of opinion they want about what Tennessee should do, but the point of this lawsuit is that if you don't have basically, if you don't have closed primaries, you can't threaten people with criminal prosecution. If you want to control the primaries that way, then you should just have party registration. And that may be where this ends up going anyway. Like there is some push in the Republican legislature for that. So that could be where we land. Yeah.
It seems like it's a regular, like as soon as an election happens, there's a big push inside the state Republican Party, at least, for like, hey, let's go ahead and close these things already. Why are we not doing this? Yeah. And then it just kind of fizzles off as the year passes, and then we get to another election and they do it again.
Well, we'll see what comes out of this particular lawsuit. But, right, especially if there is a ruling in the favor of the plaintiffs in this lawsuit, I would not be surprised to see the legislature in this coming session say, okay, we're going to go ahead and shut this down. But we'll see how it goes. Let's go ahead and take a quick break, Seth, and then we'll come back and talk about it next week. Okay, looking ahead to the coming week. It's not going to be very active as far as the civic calendar goes. The school board, Knox County School Board, is having its monthly meetings Monday and Thursday. The work session is Monday, voting meeting Thursday, both of those at 5 p.m. in the Summer Place boardroom. And a couple interesting things on the agenda having to do with charter schools. We talked last month. The board actually failed to approve an operating agreement contract with the new charter school getting ready to open this coming fall, Knoxville Preparatory Academy, Knox Prep. And that was mostly a function of there not being enough board members there. They voted 4-3 to approve it, but you have to have 5 votes to pass anything on the 9-member school board. So the most likely thing is that they will come back and pass that this month. They are also going to be getting the annual report from the one existing charter school that we have in Knox County, Emerald Academy, which as part of their contract with the school board, and Knox Prep will have to do this too, does have to make an annual report on, their various performance metrics and fiscal management, like the whole deal. Gets back a little bit to the accountability piece we were talking about earlier with school vouchers. Charter schools do have lots of accountability built into the law. They're accountable in most of the same ways that normal public schools are, and they also are responsible for these kinds of annual reports to whoever their chartering authority is, whether it's the local school district or the state. And so there will be charter school discussion at the school board, and that's about it. We're getting into the holiday season here. Things get a little sparse in terms of substantive civic meetings and engagement. We do have ongoing holiday events, of course, this coming week. I think the Tour de Lights.
Tour de Lights on the 9th, yeah.
Yep. So if you have not yet made it downtown to see all of the holiday lights and decorations, it's quite pretty.
Oh yeah. Christmas is always a time for Knoxville to kind of put up the lights and put on a nice show, and there are a lot of things to do, and you have had the parade on Friday. You had the Tour de Lights coming up, which is for those who aren't real familiar with it, it's a pretty fun bike ride with decorated bikes and riders.
I believe you are a Tour de Lights veteran yourself, Scott.
I am not a Tour de Lights veteran. There was actually it was kind of this was before it got as big and kind of formal as it is, when it was just a bunch of bunch of friends who got together and did it. And there was some joke about me being the grand marshal of the parade of the Tour de Lights one year.
But you were not actually in the parade.
I did not
yourself.
actually mount a bicycle and go. And I think I had to cover something. I was working at the News Sentinel at the time. I think had to cover something or something. I don't remember what the deal was, but
I had it in my head that you had done it.
Well, there was a lot of fun joking, and if you know me, you'd think that my being the grand marshal of a bicycle ride would be kind of a humorous thing. And
out in front waving the Bah Humbug banner.
Yeah, and it was more me being a Scrooge kind of thing, and there was a lot of talk about it, and I was going to do it, and something came up. I don't remember what it was, but I wasn't able to do it. But I wholeheartedly endorse it. I think it's a fantastic event.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to watch for sure. Okay, well, we will be back next week to talk about anything that happens between now and then. Until then,
well, just because there aren't a lot of public meetings doesn't mean there won't be any news. So yes, we will be back. There will be things that we write about and things that we cover. And so we're not going to skip out on the podcast just because things are slow this week.
That's right. Well, we hope you have a good week. We'll see you next week. Thanks as always to Lord Seth Barber, our producer with Barbarian Productions. Our theme music is by William Wright, and we will talk to you next week.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.